trip to Molineux following a questionable victory in Newport, while Marcus Rashford continues to entertain a host of back pages. Just some of the topics coming up after an exclusive chat with two of the leading figures of the Manchester United Supporters Trust on the latest episode of your Stretty Cast. You are very welcome to the latest instalment of the Stretty Cast, and on this day, we are delighted to welcome two men who hold Manchester United very close to their hearts. After 2 decades of fan disgruntlement regarding the ownership and mismanagement of the club, a multitude of supporter groups have risen to prominence fighting for the cause on multiple fronts. Now, front and centre stands the Manchester United Supporters Trust, or MUST for short, and we are extremely pleased to introduce CEO Duncan Drasdo. Duncan, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Very happy to be here.
We are also extremely pleased to welcome a key MUST board member in Chris Rumford. Chris, you're also very welcome to the Stretty Cast. How are you keeping?
I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, like Duncan, happy to be here and join your esteemed production.
You're very kind. You're too kind. Before we dive into the present, I'm always conscious that not every member of our ever-expanding listenership will be fully up to speed on the cause that we are going to discuss. So, Duncan, for the ear that would like a little introduction, can I ask you to supply a brief description of the work you've been involved in since 1998?
Yeah, sure. I mean, how we actually started was we were Manchester United shareholders, and in 1998, Rupert Murdoch and B-Sky B attempted to take over the club, which would have meant that us as fans would all have lost our shares, which we feel is a very important part of being a fan to us. It's actually sort of the closing of the circle in some way of for a supporter to be both a fan, a customer, of course, is the way the business would look at it, but also a part owner. And so when Murdoch tried to take over, there were a number of people who said, we're going to try and do something about it. We're going to resist it. They started a group called Shareholders United Against Murdoch. So that was when we were established. It was SUAM in those days. That takeover was blocked eventually through political lobbying. The Monopolies and Mergers Commission blocked the takeover. And so we decided that we ought to then carry on pushing for increased fan share ownership and to try and head off any future such challenge. And so we converted then to Shareholders United, which was essentially an organisation advocating for fans to become shareholders in the club. And we created a share scheme back then, which made it easy for fans to buy a share in the club. And then we could vote those shares collectively. And we did that and built up that fan base. There were 32,000 people who bought shares through us. And another about 38,000 on the share register, so something like 70,000 fan shareholders at 12th of May 2005, when the Glazers succeeded in taking over the club. Obviously, in the year or so prior to that takeover, we'd done everything we could to try and head it off. We didn't have the political lobbying angle because the Glazers weren't broadcasters in the same way that Murdoch was, so there wasn't the same way to oppose the takeover. But what we did was we informed supporters why it was a bad thing. We told everyone about the debt and the damage it would do. And I can tell you we were called scaremongers and told that we were deluded and we just didn't understand business and all these sort of things. And, you know, I mean, it isn't blowing our own trumpet to say we've been proved absolutely right. And I think, you know, almost every fan now accepts that. It took until when Sir Alex Ferguson retired, probably, until people started to see the true damage that the Glazers had done, because he kind of papered over the cracks with his incredible management skills, maintained that momentum of success right until his final season. And so suddenly we're confronted with the situation that the Glazers' debt and the damage they've done to the club, the fracturing of our fan base are all starting to, you know, chickens coming home to roost. But we launched campaigns all through that period. You know, the second uprising, if you want to call it that, after 2005 was 2010. People may remember the Green and Gold campaign. That was orchestrated by us. And in fact, our now finance director, Andy Green, was one of the main people who educated people on the finances of the club. and the damage that would be done with a bond issue, which was the thing that kicked things off in 2010. And that excited a group of people called the Red Knights. They've never actually, I don't think, come forward and admitted who they were, but most people know Jim O'Neill, now Lord O'Neill, was one of them. They tried to put together a takeover. Ultimately, that wasn't successful, and I think we all can see partly why in recent times when we've seen what valuation the Glazers are putting on the club. So that was unsuccessful. The club then went on in 2012 to have a flotation on the New York Stock Exchange, and that probably signalled really the end to any hope of us removing the Glazers through kind of financial pressure, because it gave them access to finance, took away the challenge they had with the debt payments, the PIK debt as it was, and made it very difficult to motivate supporters to do anything. We'd been advocating for fans to keep protesting all through that period, but there was just no interest anymore, no momentum. I mean, the last protest I remember was the Manchester Derby, and I was literally the only person there on the back car park where the helicopter was, and nobody else turned up. Well, in fact, Ian Sterling turned up, to come and retrieve me from security. But, we realised the game was up in terms of protest at that point. But I suppose the performance on the pitch hadn't yet really dipped at that point. And so there wasn't really a popular uprising among supporters. And following this, the flotation, the club actually reached out to us for the first time in many years and said maybe we should actually start having a dialogue rather than having, just a negative relationship. And, prior to that, they'd broken off relations with us. We'd always had a very good relationship with the club, the board, and worked with the club. But it was them that chose to break it off because obviously the owners were uncomfortable with our campaign against them. So I think that kind of summarises up to that point when we reopened the dialogue. And it was very slow at first. There was a lack of trust on both sides. But what we felt was, we don't believe that we're in a position to change the ownership, but what we can do is try and get the best deal for supporters. And the only way to do that, or the way that you can do that best, is obviously through dialogue. And I should say this is dialogue from the owners, who obviously we still have the same concerns and unhappiness about how they took over the club and the damage they've done. So I think that kind of brings us up almost to date in that, that dialogue has got better, and I think we've done more and been able to get more wins for supporters over that period of time.
Just on that dialogue, Duncan, how important is that? Because I think a lot of people get the perception that because most have a dialogue with the club, that therefore they're in bed with the club, and that's not necessarily the case, because there's obviously things that you disagree with the club on. But how important is it to have that dialogue since it opened?
Yeah, I mean, in bed with is a sort of, emotive term, isn't it? I mean, certainly, and again, I would distinguish. I mean, we want to have a close relationship with the club. It's our football club. That's what it should be. And it is different from, the relationship with the owners, because they've been negative in our view over the full period of their ownership. But if you want to influence things for the betterment of supporters and indeed for the football club itself, the way to do that is to deal with the executive management. And so that's been our role, to try and do that the best we can, to try and consult with supporters and represent their views. And I'm sure Chris will talk a little bit more about that in particular, because he's the man with his finger on the pulse in terms of our manifesto and so on.
I'd first just stress, Duncan, the real tangible wins that have been achieved through dialogue with the club over recent years. The return of standing to Old Trafford. We were one of the first Premier League stadiums to have standing. We've now got, I think, more standing areas than other clubs. That was a long-standing ask of ours. Reclaiming the Stretford end, so that the corporate facilities that are in the heart of the Stretford end are being removed at the end of this season after our campaigning for many years. The end of the automatic cup scheme, where every season ticket holder had to buy every cup ticket to attain their season ticket. So there's just three examples, but there's a lot of attention sometimes on the high profile campaigns against the owners or whatever, but actually for match going fans, probably those real wins we achieved through dialogue. I mean, for heaven's sake, cutting the price of beer, was also another one. You know, those things probably matter more to more fans than some of the big arguments about ownership and governance and the like.
And Chris, Duncan is obviously, after touching on the fact that you're a man with a finger on the pulse and a button, how would you describe a standard day, week, month in the life of Must Hierarchy?
I mean, we meet as a group about, well, in terms of a proper formal meeting, about twice a month. So every 2 weeks, although there's a lot of informal contact as well as that, including, a beer on match day in the sort of must house most of you will have seen, walking to the ground. Meetings with the club. I mean, Duncan will do far more of those than I will, because I have a day job as well. But there's periodic meetings with the club. Most recently, one with Jim Ratcliffe, which I'm sure we'll come back to. We are mostly volunteers, so we are giving out our spare time to do this stuff. Yesterday, Duncan and I had a 3-hour meeting to discuss how we take forward, the membership offer. It takes up a lot of time, and but we'll do it willingly for the greater good and in the interests of United fans.
In terms of looking at it for the greater good for United fans, between both of you and between the organisation, the message of who we are and what we do is very much being pushed out on social media and across as many channels as you possibly can. Is it an attempt to reconnect with the fan base? And what are the ultimate aims by this very, very public sentiment that's going across now?
The organisation has changed a lot over the years, and Duncan's told a bit of the history right now. And, we were, for a long time, I guess, primarily a protest organisation with not much of a dialogue with the club. That's changed a lot in recent years. And so really it's an attempt to try and define who we are and what we do. Any organization needs to define itself, because if it doesn't, someone else will define it for them. So we've tried to say, who are we? Well, we're a group of people who are here to build a future for Manchester United where the views, needs, priorities and interests of supporters are central to the running of the club. That's our vision. We want a Manchester United where our needs and your needs as fans are central to the running of the club. And then we tried to define the 5 ways we do that. Firstly, we use the position we've got to represent fans' voices to the club. So we've got the access and the influence to tell the senior management of the club, what fans want. We use our media profile and our 100,000 membership to campaign on fans' priorities. Obviously, we were prominent in the campaign to stop the Super League, reclaiming the Stretford end, safe standing I've already talked about. We are working and to recover a position where fans who want to can buy a stake in the club and buy a share in the club, because ultimately we think that's the best way to make sure we're never ignored again, if you actually own a stake, even a very small one. The next area we do is we stand up for fans and make sure they're fairly treated, an area Duncan and before him our friend Ian did so much work in, picking up individual cases of fans who are badly treated, European aways, all sorts of things, police issues, all sorts of things. We've helped hundreds of Reds protect their rights. And the last thing we need to do, in order we do all of the other ones, is listen. We need to be constantly listening to fans so that we understand their views and are able to represent them, understand what they want, so we're able to take their voice to the club and, where necessary, to the outside world.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that it is a work in progress. We're constantly trying to improve and be better at that. There's been periods where we've kind of been relatively dormant as an organisation, and we've had new energy injected by new people coming and getting involved. And we're open to new people. I mean, a lot of the problem we've had in the past actually is that people aren't motivated to volunteer their time and to get involved. And trying to get people to come and be involved in the committee or come onto the board has been a challenge. And actually what happens is it's only at periods where it gets exciting that suddenly lots of people want to do it. And of course, then you get other groups spring up who decide that they want to do the same thing, but do it their own way, and that's fine. Every fan's entitled to do that. But a lot of the work is very unglamorous. People think that there's some sort of perks or whatever to being involved, and actually it's giving up a lot of time and a lot of dull meetings and listening to people. Even when you don't agree with them, you've got to listen to every fan's point of view, taking the flak. That rolls off your back to a degree. But of course, if your own fans are criticising, then it's always cuts more than it would do if it was, coming from the opposition supporters, if you like. So, it's rewarding in some situations, but, there's a lot of it is just dull, hard work as well.
Can you touch on there, Duncan, is the criticism that you receive and must as a group receives? And as you said, it can be hard to take at times. Social media, as we've obviously discussed off screen many times, can be quite a toxic area to be involved in. And it's probably the main area you're going to see criticism from fans. How hard is it to listen to people slating something every time you try to do something, or when you put a bit of energy into something positive, to know that before you even put it up, it's going to get knocked back and instantly slated with the old stereotypical comments of in bed with the Glazers, got a seat at the table, don't do anything, don't represent the fans. I mean, at a human level, it's got to piss you off listening to that kind of stuff every day. But does it ever take away from the motivation to keep going, or how do you deal with the criticism?
I mean, you got to remember that, we've been listening to that for a long time, more than a decade, certainly, or certainly since Fergie retired, when people have been pissed off. I mean, when your fan base is unhappy, they tend to turn and try and find a scapegoat, don't they? And, if fans are feeling unhappy, they'll look at, well, why aren't these guys doing more for us? But, you can't help feeling, well, why didn't you say any of this when we were asking you to help us protest previously and when we were telling you what the problems were? But, you've just got to accept that. That kind of goes with the job. And I think the social media criticism, I think you've got to divide it into two parts. There are people who are posting stuff under their own name, under their own profile, and you're always going to take that more seriously. And obviously, if it's a member, you're going to listen very carefully because they've obviously been someone who's tried to support the organisation. And so that's an important criticism to listen to. But I think you have to discount the anonymous profiles and, people that are effectively trolling. And most of the criticism I see very little criticism from genuine fans posting in their own name who are prepared or would even come and meet you and have a discussion with you. And I'll always invite people to come and have a discussion. The people who've been our most vehement critics have always been invited to come and meet us, and some of them have, and some of them haven't. And the ones that have, I can say almost without exception, we've reached a kind of consensus agreement, even if we don't agree on every point. There's been a respect between people. But you can't have that with an anonymous profile on Twitter when they don't want to listen to your answer. They want to make their point. And I think those ones, you just got to discount, whether you block them or mute them or just ignore them. They're not there to get an answer, really. They're just there to make a jibe, I think. And so that's how I see those points.
And I think what you got to always remember is it's not about us. It's not even about our club. It's just the world we live in, whatever environment you operate in, whether it's, football for us or, media, politicians. It's just a very sad feature of the world we live in. And you've just got to learn to ignore it.
As United fans, we want to be united. We want to be all working towards the same goal and be together. And I think actually the vast majority of United fans are sick of the bickering and infighting. They don't actually want to see that. I think it is... if you could do analysis on it, I'm sure you'd find it's very small numbers of accounts that are all doing the same sort of negativity. And most fans don't want to read that and don't want to hear that. They want actually to be positive and to support the club in a positive way and to actually enjoy their experience as United fans and enjoy the camaraderie you get. I mean, that's how I feel about going to a match. I'm there to be with other United fans and enjoy all supporting the team together. And I don't like the negativity. And I think you rarely do see that on a match day. It's something that's on social media in that environment, really.
Be fair to you to back up part of the conversation we've just had, talking about people that tweet from their own account and whatnot. Me being one of them who took a swipe at you quite a while back when the fan share scheme and the Sign for United came out. And to your credit, you contacted me, asked me for my phone number. We had a chat for what was supposed to be 10 minutes and it ended up about an hour and a half, and then ended up with a good few beers and a couple of drinks with our good friend Ian Sterling and yourself, and we definitely managed to mend bridges and move on from it. So credit and fairness for that. I mean, someone who reaches out to someone who's gone after them, it shows a lot of balls to do that. So that's a fair shout. And on the topic of the fan share scheme, since I just brought it up, we may as well roll into it. What's the state of play there? We'll say the fan share scheme became very, very important after the European Super League. A lot of time and energy put into it, a lot of effort put into it to promote it, to try and get it to where it could get to. And now, obviously, with India's coming in, it might murk the waters a bit for a while, but is the focus still on the same thing? I mean, fan share schemes has been something you've always been very concentric on. Is it still at the forefront of your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to remember, it's literally written into our constitution of the organisation that we're there to advocate for fans being shareholders in the club, because we think that's a good thing. It's about uniting everyone behind the same goals, pushing forward together, trying to break down the them and us to a degree. I know it's difficult when you've got some of the major shareholders we've still got at the moment, but you can see that could change over time. And I'd love to be back in a position where we all felt that we're all fans and we're all shareholders and owners together, and everyone's united, pushing towards that same goal. In terms of the fan share scheme, I mean, the reason why it took a long time is, again, it's down to the Glazers' decision to do this dual class share structure, which makes things very complicated. We were told it would, we were wasting our time and we'd never get anywhere. They'd never agree to give equal voting rights to supporters. And ultimately, we got that negotiation and we got to a point where we had a scheme that was viable. It wasn't as big. There wasn't a lot of things about it that we'd have preferred to be different, but it was a good option, I think, for a starting point, a kind of pilot study to see whether there's interest among supporters to do it. I think we've certainly seen that there is interest. That Sign for United campaign generated a lot of interest at the time. Obviously, when the strategic review, which obviously is ultimately ended with Sir Jim Ratcliffe's investment, when that started, everything was put on hold. And, we can't say with any certainty whether we're going to immediately pick that up again now. Those are discussions that are just starting now. And obviously, he may have a different view on it. He may not support it. We don't know that yet. So him being now the biggest single shareholder, he's going to have a say in that, because obviously any shareholder is going to have a say in the idea of issuing new shares, whether it's for a fan share scheme or for any other purpose. But I think what's quite nice about the Ratcliffe investment, although we'd have preferred to see the money, all of it, going to the club rather than to the Glazers and other shareholders, he has actually done something which is a bit like the fan share scheme, which is issuing new shares in the club. Or that's something that's is to come, of course, I should say. And if that happens, there'll be $300 million. It ultimately will go into the club through the issue of new shares. And that's effectively the same thing that we're talking about, with fans being a part of that. And I think everyone feels that that's a positive thing. We want to see investment into the club, not profiteering by existing shareholders. And that's what the fan share scheme would do. It might start out small, but the idea is, if it works and it builds confidence and builds momentum, it could be funding quite big projects ultimately, and it could be making a difference in terms of, the size of the collective fan share ownership over a period of time. We don't expect to have a majority. I mean, probably never actually, but even having shares in the club gives you legal rights that you don't have otherwise, and you can't be ignored then. But I also think psychologically, it just changes the approach that other shareholders are going to have towards fans. They start to see you differently, and rather than just see you as customers to be milked, they might start to change their view. And so all these things are important, but clearly we'd all like to see different majority owners than we've got now, and maybe we're on the start of that road. But I can't really say any more with certainty about where we're going with the fan share scheme, because it's a discussion that's only able to be restarted now we've got a bit of clarity on the strategic review.
I want to get your take on the highly publicised 1958 group and their disdain for Musk, because it's quite clear from anyone that's on social media when you see statements put out. You mentioned some of the anonymous accounts, but a lot of these are coming from the 1958, and there's no secret there. They don't hide it. What is your view on that? You've made it clear that you've nothing against people setting up fan groups and all coming together and working together, but where does this disdain come from?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it like that. I mean, the 1958, there's been some slight criticisms from the official account, if you like, and obviously there are lots of followers who've been more hostile, I suppose you could say. But I've spoken to numerous people who are involved in the 1958 and got on well with them on a personal level. We've shared the same goals. We're just using different tactics. And a lot of the time, they've asked us for help with things. We've helped them, with organising protests, holding banners for them, giving them a place to gather and promoting their marches. And so, to me, I saw it as it's a kind of pincer. We're in the at the end of things where we're using dialogue to have influence and try and put pressure on from one side, and one example of that was we were pushing for an end to the dividends, and that did stop. And I know some people are going to say, well, that wasn't you. Well, they can say that, but literally that was a request we put in to the club through the fan advisory board and said the dividends have got to stop. And it happened. And on the other side, we've got the 1958 who were doing exactly what we were doing in 2004, 2005, right through until nobody was interested in doing it anymore in perhaps about 2010, 12, something like that. But we said, look, we support that. We think that pressure through protest and pressure through dialogue are two different ways of maximising the influence we have to try and get a better deal for our supporters. Whether we can actually change the ownership through that, I think everyone's a bit sceptical about that, to be honest. But certainly you've got to try and you push as hard as you can. So I didn't see there was a conflict there. I think, there are people probably in the group who have ambitions to replace us, or certainly that's what a lot of their followers seem to talk about. We want the 1958 to become the new must, if you like, or replace them. And, they're entitled to form their own group and try and build a membership and do what they want. But I would also say, the supporters' trust is there. It's got a structure and well established. People can join it. Anyone can join. Anyone can stand for committee. Anyone can stand for board. And to be honest, if you're setting up a new group to do the same thing, you've got to really ask, well, why are you doing that? Why aren't you standing for election and, and making your argument and winning people over because you've got a better argument? And if you have, great. That's how the democracy works. As I said to you before, our problem has actually been more that we struggle to get people to get involved. But I don't think it's really appropriate to try and just form a new organisation and just say, right, we formed our own organisation, and surprise, surprise, we think we're the best people to lead that dialogue with the club. But again, they're entitled to do that, and I'm not going to criticise them for that. I would hope that everyone is trying to push towards the same goal, and that we can have a better dialogue. And you will, I'm sure, have noted that we are very reluctant to try and criticise anybody else. We recognise how difficult it is to be a fan campaigner, whether it's protest or anything else. And so, if we have made criticisms, they're very rare, but they're not from an organisational standpoint. So I think if there is any hostility, it's one way, put it that way. But the people I've dealt with from 1958 are good people who, I've got respect for, and I've had a good dialogue with them. So I think it maybe the perception on social media is slightly different, but the people I've met face to face have all been good and, honest people who want the same things we do and have just been using different tactics, essentially.
Deviating ever so slightly, but just returning back to something that you both mentioned in terms of dialogue and obviously mentioning Ineos and Sir Jim Radcliffe. Chris, I want to ask you in terms of strategy and the initial display of public affection towards returning the club to its glory days on the field, coupled with a very public meeting. What's Must's expectation here? Do you have any concerns or expectations in moving forward following the imminent ratification?
Yeah, look, there's a long way to go and we're not celebrating any victories yet. The victory will be when United are back at the top of European football, right? And we'll all celebrate that victory. Well, this is, we hope, the start of a journey. And the early signs from Jim Ratcliffe and his team were very positive. He put out a message to the fans, I think, on Boxing Day, 2 days after, the deal was signed. Obviously, a time of the year when most of us have got a lot of other things going on. He then moved to meet ourselves and other fans representative forums only 2 or 3 weeks after that, none of which he needed to do until the deal was fully ratified, which it still isn't yet. He could very easily have hid behind the fact that the deal hasn't gone through, so there's nothing he can say. So the fact that, you know, he and his team proactively, you know, arranged for that dialogue with fans and spent 3 to 4 hours in one day sitting down with fans. I mean, that's more fans dialogue in one day than in 19 years from the Glazers, by far. So, you know, I think we're encouraged by that. Obviously, he's putting his own money in. Again, more money on the, you know, first thing he's done than in 19 years of the Glazers putting their own money in. So, you know, $300 million in the first instance. So, look, there's real sign for encouragement, but we are definitely not declaring victory yet. The road back for United, back to the top, is a long one, as sadly we all know, watching the club week in, week out. It's both about what happens on the field, which is Ineos's main focus. They're very clear on that. But also, I think we also know it's about the structure of the club, how the club operates. It's about Old Trafford. You know, it's a long journey, but the early signs are positive, and that, I guess that's all we can say. And I think that vindicates, you know, continuing that dialogue with them.
I think one of the concerns that fans would have, and it's a buzzword around Man United for quite some time, is debt. And
yeah,
although Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have stated they're going to invest $300 million, etc., the lack, I think, of clarity or the lack of focus on the clearing of the debt is something that irks people. Obviously, we had the Qatari bid. Now, we've heard some sensational things about the Qatari bid since. But one of the jibes towards Sir Jim Ratcliffe was that when he came in and Ineos came in, that the debt wasn't being handled, whereas Qatar, hypothetically, if they actually existed, would have eradicated the debt. Does that concern you, as a group in general, that there's no clarity or focus on clearing the debt, or no dialogue directly towards the fan base saying, although we're planning on doing this and taking over sporting control and etc., I think we'd still all like to see the club's debt be reduced drastically, and it's something that I think it bothers most people more than it should, I suppose, maybe, but it is what it is.
Yeah, no. I think the debt is an issue in a couple of ways. I mean, clearly, psychologically, it's an issue. You know, it's always felt so to me. You know, that they bought the club with borrowed money, and then on day one transferred that debt from themselves onto the club. And in a stroke, we went from being the biggest football club in the world that had no debt to the most indebted football club in the world at a stroke of a pen by them 19 years ago. So, you know, we all, I think, feel very emotionally strongly about that. And they've never paid down any of the debt. And we've got more debt in cash terms today than we did back then. The debt is a much smaller proportion of the overall value of the club, of course. So if you think of it like a mortgage, you know, the value of the house has gone up a lot, you know, fivefold, and the debt has kind of only gone up slightly. So the debt as a ratio of the value of the club has shrunk dramatically, but it's still gone up in cash terms. I think this is one where, whilst Jim Ratcliffe is only a minority owner, he's not going to pay off the debt. If you only own 25% of a company, you can't, and you're not going to pay off the debt, because the beneficiary of that is the majority owner. So, you know, I just think it's one of those ones where it's quite hard to see how there would be progress on that issue until he's in a position to be a majority owner. And I think we've been perfectly clear that whilst we're pleased with the stake he's bought, we'd be a lot more pleased if it was 51% or 100%. And I said that to him in the meeting, like, we're pleased. It could be better, but we'll work with what we've got. But I think in reality, yeah, I'm not sure what you can do on the debt until he is a majority or even a full owner.
I mean, and Chris is absolutely right, of course, that, you know, Sir Jim isn't going to pay off the debt for somebody else, you know, but there are ways that it could be approached. I mean, you can do a debt for equity swap. So effectively, you know, you issue new shares and you use the money from those. So Jim, like he's buying these, you know, assuming the tender offer goes forward, these new shares, you could do that with the debt. The reason why the Glazers might not want that is because it would dilute their shareholding further. So, they've got a selfish interest against that. But on the other hand, we do need to pay down the debt. We need more funds. We've got the challenge with financial fair play, which means that, we're not able to compete as well as we would be able to if we got rid of that debt. So, there may be pressure to do that, and we'd hope that the Glazers will agree. And certainly it's the sort of thing that we will be advocating for and have done in the past, to say, we want to see that debt taken down because you put the debt on our club and you're causing us to kind of work with one hand tied behind our back to a degree. But of course, in terms of him making any comment on that, I mean, he is literally, legally bound not to really say things like that, because those are market sensitive things. If he says, I'm going to push for another share issue, that has an impact on the perception of the market on the share price. So he can't say that he's got an ambition to do that at this point. But I would suspect he certainly has got that ambition, and that he'd want to see the debt paid down and be a much bigger investor in the club, and obviously a majority shareholder. But I just don't think it's something you can make a public statement on for the reasons I've said.
The link between the debt and our financial fair play position is something that doesn't get talked about enough. We have the same constraints of financial fair play as other clubs, and we say, oh, we can't buy that player, we can't buy that player because of financial fair play. I think it was certainly a consideration in the transfer window in the summer, where we didn't go for Harry Kane, we didn't go for Declan Rice, we didn't go for the top players that were available, and the club will say one of the factors was financial fair play. We are only in such a bad financial fair play position because of the amount of money we spend on debt interest. And that is money directly out the door of the club to the people who own the debt, and that it directly impacts upon the financial fair play calculation and leaves us not going for the best players available.
And by the way, it's likely to get worse over the next few years because the interest rate environment's changed, and some of the debt is fixed interest debt, which is going to change in a few years' time, and is almost certainly going to go up significantly in terms of that cost. So there's a bit of a ticking time bomb there, and I think that's partly why this strategic review happened from the Glazers, because they knew they couldn't carry on without new investment or selling the club. And then, of course, you've got the second aspect, which is how are you going to pay for the redevelopment of the stadium that we all recognise is necessary, whether it's a new build or a redevelopment. Either way, it's going to be a lot of money, and the Glazers are not going to fund that, and the club can't borrow that much money because we've got the same problem with increasing the debt is just not an option, is it? So something's got to change there, and hopefully we've got an investor sitting there who's got the resources, got the motivation to actually change that and be a bigger investor. We'll just have to see how that plays out.
And finally, because I know the two of you guys are pressed on time, but I have to ask something. Sticking on what you were just talking about with regards to finances and financial fair play and the impending doom that looks like it's coming forward with investment, the only way that this club can successfully grow and build into the future is if everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet and there is a sustainable plan put in play over the next 3, 5, 6, 10 years. Outside of that, and looking at what sort of a strategy and a plan have you guys got developed for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, certainly, specifically around debt and investment in the club. I mean, we'd love to see, the biggest untapped resource that Manchester United's got is its huge global fan base. Everyone knows that. And I think one of the mistakes that the Glazers have made in the past, and it's this idea that you treat fans like customers and you try and milk value out of them, rather than realising that if you actually give fans an ownership stake, there's a huge potential for fans to be investors in the club. And, that's not just about tapping into a source of new investment, but I just think it's a virtuous circle that creates such a positivity around the club. So you imagine if whether you believe that the global fan base is 600 or 700 million or more likely sort of 100 or 200 million, it's enormous. And it's one of the points of difference we've got versus a lot of our rivals, and particularly the ones that have been effectively doped with finances from oil barons, if you like, or Russian oligarchs. And we've not actually taken advantage of that. And so I think that there's a positivity there that United could actually take a big advantage from embracing that global fan base and having them part of that. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why we favour that idea. It's not something that can be done quickly. This is why we start with the idea of a small fan share scheme. But if you prove the concept works, you can see, just looking at the numbers, anyone can do a back of the fag packet kind of calculation and realise that there's potential for a lot of investment. And what would United fans want more than to say, I own a piece of the new stadium or the redeveloped stadium because I've bought my shares, I've done my bit, and I own a part of it. I think that's such a positive thing to me. So, that's really why we've advocated that for all these years.
Guys, thank you ever so much for your time, your insight, and we look forward to seeing what you guys can unfold over the next 5-10 year period, as we've said. Wishing you both the very best.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.
That was a bit of all right, boys, wasn't it? Absolutely fantastic to get the insight from two lifelong Manchester United supporters. I hope each and every one of you listening really, really took something from that, because it was a great conversation and great insight into the work that's been completed on a daily basis to reclaim this football club for the fans. And last Sunday, we saw United come away from Newport with a 4-2 victory in the FA Cup. Normally, that would be cause for excitement and applause. But within that 4-2 victory, I think there was more questions than answers, and it's becoming a very familiar topic. The game itself, I suppose, couldn't have started out better, lads. Bruno Fernandes opening the scoring after 7 minutes. Kobbie Mainoo getting his first senior goal for the club after 13. And it looks like Manchester United are sailing, have an opportunity to go 3-0 up, but for Garnacho, instead of crossing it, hit the woodwork. And from there, the home crowd, I suppose, were gone very quiet. They needed something to spark them back into life. And they got just that from Brian Morris in the 36th minute, when his deflected effort really, really set the place alight. 2 minutes after the restart, we're 2-2, and all of a sudden you're starting to think, good God, this can't happen. Now, thankfully, on the day, Anthony and Rasmus Højlund in the 94th minute sealed a 4-2 victory. And realistically, it was more than United deserved on the basis of what should have happened. Forget about what they should be doing before the game. Just based on the fulcrum of what actually happened during the 90 minutes, it was a deserved result. But again, there's just far too many questions, and it was a worrying victory, wasn't it?
Yeah, United making hard work of it again. You go on two goals clear against League Two opposition. You really kind of expected them to start sailing, and maybe this is the one game where we rack up a cricket scoreline this season. It should have been that way, but I don't know what it is. Like the first goal we conceded, and they'd all make that was a great goal, and that it took a massive deflection, and no goalkeeper in the world is going to stop that with the deflection. Second one, we conceded. You got Rafael Varane, a World Cup winning centre-back, getting turned inside out by League Two striker. Goalkeeper didn't cover himself in glory either. But yeah, I just thought we made hard work of it. Same old as this season. Can't seem to put a good performance in. And that's going to get a little bit more worrying, I find, as the weeks go on, if it continues, because we're now seeing some of these players that we've been waiting for to come back from injury now. There's a few more to return. And if we're still talking of performances like this in 2-3 months, I think there's going to even be more questions than you're talking about right now.
You just touched on the returning players. We saw Luke Shaw, Casemiro, Lisandro Martinez coming back. Look, if you really, really want to be sort of open, pragmatic about it all, they're looking to rebuild minutes in their legs, okay? But regardless of that, there shouldn't be any questions against a League Two side, particularly a side that are struggling in League Two. Now, Brian, someone we spoke about last week in preparation for the game was Anthony. He bagged himself a goal and an assist, and there seemed to be a little bit made about his celebrations after the goal.
Everyone's always looking to give out about something, and to be fair, I'm not Anthony's biggest fan by any means. The celebration was a bit OTT. I mean, you've given the opposition he's playing against. It wasn't like he was a worldie from the halfway line, but it is what it is. It is what it is. He is what he is. It was just, I just thought it was another stick to beat someone with, to be honest with you. It was silly. It was silly. It was over the top. I enjoyed alternative MUFCs. I don't know if you saw it or not, but alternative MUFC do a great alternative commentary, and one of the themes of it was, is this an acceptable way to celebrate a goal against this opposition? The first two were fine. Anthony's was an absolute disgrace, and then Rasmus Hoyland's was totally acceptable because he's doing absolutely everything himself, and no one fucking thinks to pass him the ball. And he gave the quote that Rasmus Hoyland must be invisible is the only answer I have, which isn't probably too far from the truth, because for some insane reason Rasmus Hoyland doesn't get supplied with much supply from our wide men. So going back to last week's episode, we were discussing what we expected to happen, and although your two boys were confident with your 4-0s, I said I gave a 2-0 prediction due to the fact that it's one of those grounds and it's one of those games. And granted, we should be getting more than what we got out of it, but that's what we are at the moment. We're not playing well. We're not cohesive. We don't link up very well. We just don't put in a performance that you can expect that kind of a scoreline. Like, I'd love if we could, but we haven't been firing all cylinders by any means. And these boys coming back in, I really hope they're going to change the state of play, because it needs it.
How much of it comes down to the lack of clinical decision making in the final third? Look, we've read about this for many, many years, that Alex Ferguson wouldn't necessarily focus on what happened in the final third, that it was left down to creativity. You see the same with Pep Guardiola. You see it with multiple managers across the continent. Will say them and their coaches in the training field will focus on build-up play, defence, transitions, splitting midfield, breaking the press. But ultimately, when it comes down to the final third, there's got to be a reliance on your key attacking players to be able to make the correct decision. What I see week in, week out, and when you're touching on Rasmus Hoyland, I see our wide players, and almost like there is a sense of self-entitlement from the wide players that if they beat a man, they're almost entitled to take the shot on. More often than not, it's coming out as if it is the complete wrong decision. Like, look at that Newport game and look what I said when we're 2-0 up. There's a great breakaway. Garnacho gets the ball. Bruno and Hoyland are running into the box. They're clear there for a tap-in. That's it. If the game goes 3-0, it's certainly over, because every single head in the ground is going to drop. He takes a shot instead. But it's just a continuous trend over and over again. Now, Garnacho, don't get me wrong, fantastic player, brilliant potential. But his decision-making, coupled with Anthony's decision-making, just has an inability to be able to make the correct decision. And how much of that is affecting us in an attacking aspect?
Well, what you're listing there, Sean, is a trend, right? You're listing basically all the players that we play out wide are not contributing or not providing service. So that drags me back to, look, I'm one of Ten Hag's biggest supporters, but what are they doing in training? You know, like that build-up play, like you look at our build-up play when it's effective. It's usually a high diagonal ball out wide when we catch a team on the counter-attack, and it's rush. That's not really build-up play. That's not how the teams that we kind of aspire to play like, and the coaches that we aspire to play like. That's not how they build up. They build up in phases and passes and you know, combinations in that. You look at us sometimes, most weeks, and it's like the players don't train together all week. There's no combinations of play. And it's all rushed and it's all counter-attacking. You know, if you told me that we were going to replace Ollie and 2 years down the line, we were still talking about counter-attacking football, you know, I would have wondered what's the point. But I guess we have had lots of injuries. I'm still optimistic about the future under Ten Hag, but I think what's getting a bit frustrating for me is, we're going back to it again, is the performances. They have to improve. We know the results have to improve in the first half of the season, but fuck me, he comes out telling us we've controlled games for 85 minutes. You're there wondering, well, have we watched the same game? How many games, honestly, can you say where you felt that? The manager comes out saying we controlled that for 85 minutes or whatever he says, and you're there thinking, fuming for what you've seen for 90 minutes. So, look, I know what he says publicly is different to what he says behind closed doors, but look, things have to improve. I know we won the weekend 4-2 into the next round, great, but things have to improve.
Just on that, before I move on, I think if he's coming out and if he's doing is spitting negatives, he's just following the narrative that's in the media Monday through Sunday. Yeah. He has to be one of the very, very few people that says something good. Otherwise, it's just complete negativity, morning, noon, day and night.
Just to his credit, I know we're going to get onto this topic in a bit, so we won't go too much on it with Marcus Rashford, but with that whole kind of chapter we've seen out playing the last few days, I think Ten Hag has controlled that really well. You know, media are asking about, he's saying, no, it's an internal matter, case is closed, and so on. So look, Ten Hag controls the media well at times, and you know, I guess you're right. We don't want another Jose Mourinho where he's coming out after bad results or bad performance and throwing people under the bus. That's just a disaster.
We were going to talk about Rashford. Obviously, highly publicised now that he was out enjoying himself and then inadvertently called in ill. He wasn't in the matchday squad against Newport. He was instead left back training by himself. And as we are approaching another trip to Molineux against Wolves, all eyes are going to be on whether or not he's going to be there. I know that players are human beings. I totally understand that. And I would be a massive advocate that the players should be allowed to have personal lives. I don't see anything wrong with these guys going out and enjoying the millions of pounds that they're making. That's perfectly fine. But is it fair to say that as one of the leading characters in a Manchester United dressing room, you should really and truly pick and choose your battles? And how much of that then comes down to the people that he's surrounding himself with? Quite clearly, he doesn't have capable people telling him what he should be doing.
No, it's funny because we had a very similar conversation about seemingly one of his best pals in the team, which was Jadon Sancho. Sancho making poor decisions, and we spoke about it in depth. And is it because he's surrounded by bad people? Has he got the wrong advice coming in? Is there no one telling him wind your neck in and you've got to do this, you've got to do that? Sancho is now in the past for the time being, and we move on to Marcus. And then I think it was Gary Neville during the week or the last few days who said, literally, pick your timing. And it was a fair comment, you know. He's like, you can go out for a few drinks, you can have a life outside of it, but like, go back to the City game. Myself and Dale were at it that day. We were back in the hotel lobby after the game, fuming, sitting down almost silently. He was in China White. During the week, he goes on the piss, calls in sick. Now look, I'm no man to fucking slate him for that, because it's not like I haven't done it myself, and most fellas can't say they haven't. But the thing about Marcus is, if you look at it one way, you can say, right, all he's done is he's a young enough lad. He's a superstar footballer on big money, went out on the lash, made a mistake, called in sick. Fair enough. And then you can look at it another way, saying this isn't the first incident in the last while. Is it becoming a trend? It's not really that much of a trend, because he hasn't caused that much hassle. It's just the fact that his demeanour on the pitch, his performances, his overall attitude, coupled with these little incidents on top of it, it's all leading to a question of what's happening with Marcus Rashford. He's obviously not happy. He's obviously not happy in himself. He doesn't look like a fellow who's enjoying his football, or, to be blunt about it, enjoying being at Manchester United, which is worrying because he's one of our own, as they say. I don't know. It's one of those ones we're going to have to see it play out. I do think that he got absolutely and utterly crucified by the media and crucified by even our own fan base to a level that was insane. I mean, okay, he fucked up, fair enough. But Jesus Christ, he didn't kill somebody. Like, it's just gone way OTT. And even as late as again this evening, I'm still seeing stuff on social media. Rashford this, Rashford that. Like, Jesus Christ, it's been dealt with. Ten Hag has dealt with it. Rashford held his hand up and said, sorry, we move on. It's not the end of the world. Of all the incidents and issues that Eric Ten Hag has had to deal with since he came into Manchester United, this would rank as one of the lower ones, I'm sure, because we've had some fair catastrophes to try and navigate around. Look, Marcus Rashford is on form, a happy, a Marcus Rashford who wants to be playing football is electric, and we saw it last season, electric. We're not seeing it this season by any shape or form. The little celebration there the other day when he scored his goal and he gave the little talk and gesture to the fans. That's all right, Marcus, if you're after scoring 20 goals this season and someone's talking shit about you, but you can't be given that guff when you're not performing week in, week out, and you're on severe money and a massive contract, and you haven't performed since the contract. So he needs to sit down and have a look at himself. He needs to have a chat with who's around with him, who's surrounding him week by week and day by day, and he possibly needs to consider, are these the right people to take me forward in my career? Because we've all seen careers that can be starting very well and going very well, take a nosedive for a season or two, and all of a sudden the player makes the wrong decisions with the wrong people around them and your career goes to shit. So I think he's at a very, very critical point in his career, especially at Manchester United. He's got a couple of months left in this season where I think he needs to turn it around. He needs to put a smile on his face. But my worry is Nicky Butt's statement on that video. I don't know if you saw it during the week, that Nicky Butt, obviously after a few jars, openly said he's in a heap of shit, or a shithole of a dressing room. And it's been our concern all season, and our concern for the whole season, is the dressing room is in trouble. And it probably is in trouble. I mean, it reflects on the pitch. If they'll say they don't look like they train with each other, or some lads don't look like they like each other. 100%. And that's what we're seeing in the performances. And the performances have been dog shit, uncohesive, no creativity, no spark, no flair, no expression. That all goes back down to a bad dressing room. So that concerns me in enabling Marcus to turn this thing around.
You're speaking about concern in a dressing room and being able to turn around performances. We're looking at a trip to Molineux tomorrow evening at 8:15. Now, in one stance, Wolves have lost 6 of the last 7 Premier League meetings against United. So we do have a good record there, but they're not necessarily entertaining games. We're talking about 1-0 victories, 2-1 victories, and more often than not, they are 1-0 victories. When we're looking at those 7 Premier League fixtures that United have won, 5 of them ended in a 1-0 game. Now, whether or not we're going to see Rashford in the starting lineup or in the squad, it's going to probably make an awful lot of the headlines. But how necessary is it for the side to go out there and to really, really make a statement against a Premier League opposition?
Well, it's huge, because I think the next 3 games are really a wee make or break in terms of having any chance to really finish in the top 4. You look, we're playing Wolves this week, Wolves Thursday night, West Ham, who are above us currently in the table, and then Aston Villa, who are currently in the table, above us in the table. So win those 3 games, and I think we'll be within touching distance of top 4 with something to play for. Drop points in those 3 games, and I think we can forget about it. I think we can forget about it then. So it is crucial. It's crucial we get 3 points. First game of the season against Wolves this season, we performed abysmally and have continued to do that really since we got 3 points, and you'd hope for the same the weekend. But I think going into this game, you mentioned it, we have a decent record at Molineux, but I think Wolves are on something like an 8-game win streak at home this season in the last 8 games. So, that's probably not a stat you wanted to be told, but yeah, that's against us. But look, I also think that we've been saying for so long this season that, we'll get a win this weekend, or we win these 2 games, and this will be the turning point. Turning point is winning these next 3 games, I think. And if we don't, it's forgetting about the turning point. I think we're going to start talking about what Brian touched on last week, just getting Europa League football.
Well, I'm going to add another statistic to you there, that since the 5th of December, only Liverpool have amassed more Premier League points than Wolves. Liverpool have 17. Wolves have got 14 points. And from 7 games, they've won 4, drawn 2, and lost 1. So we're coming up against a side that are very much in form. But we are also welcoming back, and have welcomed back, a host of our superstar names. Now, given a lot of them are looking for minutes in their legs, as we touched on with Newport, we can still look forward to that trio of Luke Shaw, Lisandro Martinez, Casemiro, coupled in with Varane. When we're looking at this, and we're looking at United over the course of the season, one of the common topics that the 3 of us have been having constantly is about how we're playing, the style of football we have, how uninspiring certain victories are coming out, and how disheartening the fan base is coming as a result of a lack of cohesion within that starting 11. For me, I'm on the side of the fence that is rather looking at the individuals that have not been present. And even at the start of the season, when Martinez was there, he wasn't really there, because ultimately speaking, he was carrying an injury and he wasn't himself. With the return of these players, and what we can only hope is the return of some sort of semblance of a playing style, how soon should we expect things to improve across the board?
It's a double-edged sword, because the necessity is we see it straight away, but the reality is it might take time. So it's a bit of a killer, because some of them are coming off injuries that have taken quite a while to come back from, and any player at that level, when they're out for quite a bit, as you said, they need to get minutes in their legs, they need to get back to match fitness. Actual fitness and match fitness, 2 totally different things. The problem is we don't have time. we can't afford it. And Eric Ten Hag can't afford it, because if our excuse, or if the let off the hook situation all season has been the fact that he's been missing key players, and many, many key players all season, which he has and is accepted and is granted, when you get him back, you need to see an upturn in fortunes. You need to see an upturn in performances and an upturn in results. So I think it's coming to a situation for Ten Hag. It's make or break, because new guy coming in at the helm, over his head above in the board and in the club, watching him, analysing his performances, analysing what's on the pitch. And if we remember what Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the boys have said, we are focused on what happens on the pitch. So taking that as fact, if they don't see an upturn in performance, an upturn in results, and when he gets his, call them key players back, and he has his strongest 11, or within reason his strongest 11, and a strong bench, and the excuses start to disappear, he's in a world of trouble. So, and as are we, obviously, for our season. So my concern, my biggest concern about this is our playing style. Our playing style has been dog shit. At times it's disappeared. We haven't had a recognisable playing style. Are we starting from scratch again, which is a bit of an issue? Do you know what I mean? We always go back to Arsenal. There was 45 minutes or however many minutes against Arsenal where we saw the Eric Ten Hag style he wanted to implement this season. That's so long ago, most of these players have forgotten it. And Ten Hag has had to abandon that because he hasn't had the players to go for it. So I fear that he's going to have to start again from scratch right now with his full squad and say, this is how I want to play. It's going to take us time to get there. Does he have the time to get there? No, he doesn't. Because as Dale touched on, if we make shit of these next couple of games, the chances of getting European football, especially Champions League football, drift away very, very quickly. Then it becomes a recovery situation, and then it becomes a massive question mark over Eric Ten Hag going forward. And I'd imagine the likes of Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos who are coming in and who want to affect on-pitch results will be looking for him and looking for his head. So topsy-turvy time coming ahead.
Topsy-turvy time, and a necessity for his players to get behind him. That's front and centre, because time and time again over the last decade, we've spoken about critical moments in managerial tenures for Manchester United managers where we learn whether or not the dressing room is with him. Now, we know of various reports about player dissatisfaction, Dale. We know about various reports regarding certain players, obviously Jadon Sancho being the kingpin, and he's now left for Germany. How much of what you're seeing across the board is coming down to discontent in the dressing room? And do you think that the majority of his squad and his senior players, such as Casemiro and Varane, have his back here?
It's a tough question, because I know there are players that have it in for him. I don't think I wouldn't go as far as to say the majority. And to be fair as well, if you go to most dressing rooms, there's always going to be a few players that have an issue with a manager one way or other. I think Eric Ten Hag is under pressure. He's on thin ice, I think, because as Brian mentioned, it's not just player unrest. It's 9 times out of 10 when you've got new ownership or new people come in, they usually want to go with their own man. I think what this will boil down to is Omar Barada too. And does he want to work with Ten Hag going forward? That'd be ultimately what it comes down to. As for player unrest, Sean, I think that a lot of the players that are causing issues and maybe briefing to the media are players that have done this before and players that have done this to previous managers. And my fear would be if we want to go down the route of listening to these players and what they have to say, buckle your seatbelts and get ready for the next chapter when the next manager comes in, because it's likely going to be the same noise. I also worry about some of the other players in the camp, and one of them we mentioned is Marcus Rashford. And I know it got touched on with his agent or his representatives. I think that's the biggest concern. He made some changes to that in recent years and got rid of a very good advisor. He's being represented now by family members. His brother and his other brother helps out too. But this isn't always the way to go, as we've seen with Jesse Lingard, who I think now regrets who he had represented him down the years. Rashford is 26 now. He's not this blossoming young kid. You know, he's coming to the stage of his career where he's a man. And I look at some of the young players we have coming through, the Garnachos and whatnot. I don't think Rashford is really someone that they're going to be looking at right now as an example. He should be. He should be. He should be one of those players right now that you're talking about that's going to stand behind the manager in a time of need and stand up for United and make a difference. That's what I'm going to look at in the next few weeks. Which players are doing that? Which players looks like it's going to put in an extra shift? Because this is squeaky bum time, I feel, for Ten Hag. If the weekend, I was only thinking, if this was a disaster and we got knocked out of the FA Cup, are we now talking game by game? Is the manager under threat? I don't see many of the players coming out backing him. I see Scott McTominay doing it. He's one of a few. But to answer your question, I don't think the majority are behind him. I think there's a few. But then I also think there's a few that we need to show the door to.
I know Ten Hag has brought in a lot of his own players since he arrived, but there's still several players that remain from previous tenures. We speak about player loyalty towards managers, and Roy Keane is obviously front and centre about players throwing managers under the bus. A certain previous manager is after coming and making headlines in the last few hours. Mike Egan from the Daily Mail has stated that Jose Mourinho, of all people, is eyeing a sensational return to Manchester United. And if you believe the gall in this, that he is left with unfinished business. Jose Mourinho, Brian, Chapter 2, what do you think?
We discussed this recently when I asked you both a question on a graphic I saw on Twitter about managers we had since Ferguson, and which would you rate as the best time to be a fan of Manchester United? Jose Mourinho, Jesus Christ. The toxicity towards the end of Mourinho's tenure at United was horrific. Horrific. People will always throw the thing he was the most successful manager we've had after Sir Alex Ferguson. Yeah, and then I saw someone saying, "Oh, but the football was shite." It was shite. I know it's shite now, but it was shite under him too. So I don't see the improvement there. Mourinho, he's a spent force. He's a busted flush. I don't see the point in going back to Mourinho to play that type of football again. If you're looking at building a long-term plan and looking at changing the ethos in the club, what would you possibly bring Jose Mourinho back into the club for? I mean, even at his pomp, he was known as a 3-year manager. Year 1, brilliant. Year 2, year 3, fall out with everyone and their mother, cause fucking chaos, burn the foundations of the club and leg it. It doesn't make sense. And I'm not surprised it's coming from Keegan or the Daily Mail, because I don't trust a single word. If the Daily Mail told me today was Wednesday, I'd be looking at the calendar just to be sure. So it's a sensational clickbait headline. I'm very surprised to see Jose Mourinho being linked to it, and the amount of catching fire it's done. I don't see Jose Mourinho ever at the club as in regards unfinished business, unless he plans to come in and sell Luke Shaw, who he obviously hates. Other than that, I can't see the unfinished business he has with us. Just move on, Jose, and head off to Portugal and manage him or something.
You don't think that the special one has got unfinished business, Dale, do you?
No. Brian touched on he was a spent force when he came to United first time around. Should have never been appointed. Should have listened to Sir Bobby Charlton, and definitely should not be reappointed after what happened the last time. I think most places he went, he left the place in a right state, and we've touched on it before when we discussed previous managers a few weeks ago. Like, reflecting back on the end of his reign at United last time out, we all remembered how we really fell out of love with the team, the players, how some of them we were using words like hate, hating our own players. Now, there is elements sometimes right now where you hear people going back that way, and kind of, I wouldn't say it's as bad, nowhere near as bad, but that end of that Mourinho time, I don't think I ever felt so much disdain towards United players. So I definitely do not want to repeat that. And the worrying thing, lads, is there is a bit of a small group on social media that like the idea of it. And I think what they want is they just want United to continue being a circus. Whereas Ineos, I think what their plan is to kind of steady the ship and give us something to hope for in the future. That doesn't involve Jose Mourinho.
Now, it would not be an episode of the Strettycast unless we at least touched on a couple of our listeners' questions. I think that's only fair to say, boys. Now, I know we're strict for time here at the moment, But John Humphreys has come through on Twitter and he's asked a question for the whole group. He says, given that we are on the cusp of welcoming our entire squad back to full fitness, what is your favourite attacking lineup and where does Mason Mount fit in? Brian.
I love how you asked Brian this first.
It had to be Brian.
I'm gutted. He didn't even give me time to think about it. Where does Mason Mount fit in? Jesus Christ. I don't know, Sean. I really don't know. That's the same question that I asked myself when we signed him, because the signing never made sense to me from day one. So I can't change my stance on that. I thought there was far more pertinent sectors of the team or areas of the team or positions of the team that needed to be looked at before we spent an absolute fortune on Mason Mount. At the same time, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring, because we haven't seen much of him. He's got an injury that kept him out for ages. We haven't really seen any of him, to be honest. So my favourite attack is, if we're doing a 4-man attack, including the 10 position for the sake of argument, Garnacho left. Oh, actually, hang on. See, it's a killer, because some of them have been playing well, some of them playing shit, some of them have looked well here and there. I was going to say Garnacho right, Rashford left, Hyland up front with Bruno in behind, and Mount on the bench for the time being until he works his way back into the side. But again, like, Rashford's been so poor, can you trust him? So
let me put something to you, because I know it's something that you often put out on social media. You know, this desire to return to a 4-4-2, back to the days of 2 wide men, 2 men up front and 2 men in the centre midfield. Is that something that we could work into here?
Don't talk dirty to me, Sean, please. Not on this podcast. It's not suitable. It's rated for the family. Don't talk dirty to me.
You really are the Sean Dyche of this podcast, aren't you?
Big man, small man. Perfect.
What was ever wrong with a Niall Quinn, Ray Houghton setup? Like, what was wrong with it? There was nothing wrong with it. Stick a little speedy left winger, speedy right winger, 2 hard fuckers in the middle, 1 that can pass the ball, and 2 decent strikers. Biggest problem with our 4-4-2 is the 2 striker situation. We have one who's a young lad who's set up most of his own goals this season, because the rest of them are fucking useless. We don't have the midfield to perform it. So the 4-4-2 is out the window completely until Jose Mourinho comes in and signs all around him again. That's gone. It's a hard question to answer, because based off form, performance, and personal likes or dislikes, I'm not sure. I'll stick with Rashford left, Garnacho right. I think Garnacho would be phenomenal on the right, actually, to be honest with you, but I'm not sure it's ever going to happen. Rashford left, Garnacho right, Rasmus Højlund up front, Bruno Fernandes tucked in behind. To be confirmed when I see Mason Mount come into the side and see what he can bring to us, because I'm just not quite sure at the moment. But I can't realistically say stick Mason Mount in an X position when we haven't seen any of him. Go with that. Yeah, go with that.
Mine would be the exact same, but in regard to Mount, what I would be interested in, he's coming back into the side now from injury. What he needs to look at is, what's my best route of getting back into this team right now. I don't think he's getting in ahead of Bruno Fernandes, club captain. He's not getting in ahead of him. And I look at that right-hand side and Rashford's form. I think maybe we could play Garnacho on the left, Højlund through the centre, and test Mount on the right. You know, it's a position in which I don't think anyone is too happy with this season. Anthony, again, has underperformed. Rashford isn't playing well. We've seen Pellistri get chances, didn't pull up trees. Not sure is Ten Hag convinced by Amad Diallo. So I think with Mount coming in, the money spent on, what I'd be saying to him is, well, go make a position your own. And I don't think he's getting ahead of Bruno.
The last time we signed a guy capable of playing the 10, who can pick a defence apart, from Chelsea, might I add, we stuck him on the right wing out of necessity and destroyed a fucking top-class career for all intents and purposes. A fella that should have been sitting in the 10 position and should have played that position for the rest of his career. I don't see Mount as a right winger. He doesn't strike me as a player who has pace-wise. Has he got the pace to go beating left backs? Maybe he does. I just don't. I see him as a creative centre midfielder. I don't see him as going out as a right winger. Much the same as I absolutely am allergic to seeing Bruno Fernandes go out there. It's just play these boys where they're comfortable and capable of doing what they do best. We're still, Jesus Christ, we're still short the right winger after spending a fortune on the right wing and bringing in players left, right, and centre. We are still looking at the right wing going, this is a massive question mark, which is just testament to the fact that we fucked up so many transfers.
I was about to weigh in and say, or use Jack Grealish as an example of someone that can play out wide, isn't necessarily fast, but then you reminded me of how we were shoehorning Bruno Fernandes on the right-hand side, and I take back everything that I've suggested.
You see, this is where I'll weigh in on this now, because I don't think it's shoehorning him at all. When I look back through what Ten Hag is trying to achieve at United in terms of what he did at Ajax, he likes to play in the systematic blocks. And more often than not, what he liked to do was he liked to facilitate one wing to have a sort of a pacier player and an overload happening there. And then when he would switch it to the other side, he had a sort of a cataclysm of a bunch of very technical footballers that were able to go between one another. I firmly believe since he went for Mount and since I first saw him being linked with him, was this is a guy that he's looking for a secondary outlet to provide that creative catalyst that Bruno Fernandes provides. Now, Mount is capable of playing on the right wing because he's played there for Chelsea. Mount has the capabilities to play as an 8. He has the capabilities to play as a 10. And he's also very comfortable shifting out on either wing. And it's something that Thomas Tuchel did with him quite a lot. He transitioned him during games from the left wing to the right wing to the central positions and Mount did it seamlessly. Another huge attribute that I think he's going to bring to this is he is a player who buys into what his manager says. We've seen it under Frank Lampard. We've seen it under Thomas Tuchel. And by all accounts, from all of the reports that are coming out of Carrington, when he's actually able to train and not injured, is that he's very, very receptive to the information that's been provided to him. In my humble opinion, I firmly believe what the manager is doing here is he's looking at obviously implementing into this 4-3-3 facet that we're seeing now. And he is looking at putting Mount as a right winger. But it's not necessarily to function as a right winger because that's what Dalot or whoever's on the right back is going to be doing and providing that marauding overload. It's going to be Mount tucking in centrally. And instead of Dalot coming in and providing that support as an inverted fullback going into the 10, that's what Mount is going to do. And then you have that creativity in the centre where we can overload an attacking third. So I do firmly believe he's going to come in that avenue.
Which means we have to accept Dalot being all right.
I'm just using Dalot as an example. I'm just using as an example.
But you've also ruined my night, so I have to comment on it. I have to expect to watch Diogo Dalot maraud down the right wing, doing average enough attacking football, and make daisy chains while staring at the clouds going past at the back post in defence. Oh, Jesus, right, Ten Hag is doomed.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that particular topic, we have got yet another chapter of the Brian Murphy Poetry Analogues. We will be releasing a double-sided feature on this, and you can catch it everywhere. If you want to continue any conversation with me, you can do so, reaching me at Sean Connolly85. Brian, where can they catch you?
You can catch me on Twitter at DayTrippinRed, and please, if you don't mind, or I'll visit you and kidnap your dog, like and subscribe to the podcast.
You can follow me on Twitter at O'Donnell Dale. Won't kidnap your dog, might pet it, but do subscribe to the podcast.